Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So let's take a look at computer programming. So what exactly is programming in itself? Programming is basically, in simple terms, it's a process of writing a set of instructions, which is a computer program, for a computer to follow in order to perform a task. So when people are saying they are programming or they are coding, what they are simply doing is writing a set of instructions for a computer to follow in order for the computer to perform a task or a set of tasks. So now, when you develop an application or in a sense like write a website or a web application, it contains two main types, which is the backend and the front end. Now the backend is like the infrastructure and the data management. Like it's not the part of the website that you see. Let's take it the website in this or a web app in this scenario. Now the backend of a web application is not the parts that you see. It deals with the data management, the infrastructures. It's basically like the engine, but so you don't get to see it. But the front end revolves around the visual appeal of the web application, like the buttons, the checkboxes, the pictures, and everything. So that's the front end. So front end developers are the ones that deal with the visual aspect of a web application or a mobile application or a website or anything basically. So the front-end developers handle the visual displays, the pop-ups, and all those things that you see on the front end. So when you're using an application, you're seeing a bunch of pictures. The front-end developers are the ones dealing with that. But on the back end, it's just dealing with the data and infrastructure, like the engine of the entire stuff. So let's take this case like to an example of a car, for example. Let's say a car is an application that we have on our phones. The engine of that car is the back end because it's the part that is working, but you don't see it. Yet the car will not move without it. But now the front end is like the body of the vehicle. So it's the parts that you see, that you interact with, that you touch. So that's the front end. Now let's take a deep dive into programming. So in this video, we'll be taking a dive into just basic ideas about backend programming, front end development, and all those things like that. So first, let's learn a language for backend, right? When people are saying we write code, let's write a few lines of code and understand how the computer actually deals with those instructions that we are talking about. So now, right here, I'm using my code editor, which is VS Code. You can download yours for any operating system you're using and install to write code on your computer. So the first language we'll be dealing with here is Python. Now, as I said, a computer program is a set of instructions that you give to a computer in order for it to perform actions. Now, it's right, it's a set of instructions. But does the computer understand the human language? No. When you tell a computer you need to add two numbers together, it doesn't understand that. So what we have is a bunch of computer programs that is a language that computers understand. So now the developers learn those languages and then like write those instructions in those languages. They are called programming languages. There is a number of them. It's very plenty. We have popular languages like C, Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. HTML is actually a markup language for front end. So we have HTML, CSS, just a plethora of it. We have Ruby, we have React. It's just in their plethora. They have their different applications. For example, some languages are used for backend, some languages are used for front end. So it depends on deciding on what language to use for your project is determined by the type of project you are trying to develop. For example, some languages are specialized in developing mobile applications for your, let's say, Apple or Android devices. Some languages are best to develop desktop applications for your computers or your laptops, while some languages are best for mobile applications for web applications like that. So all those things, they have their own advantages, they have their own turn offs and turn downs. So we could say it like that. So now let's take a deep dive into Python. Python is one of the most popular backend programming languages out there. So let's create a Python program. Let's say index or basic.py. Now we have a pattern to naming files in programming. Now since we have different programming languages, we have different each of the if you create a computer program now and it's supposed to be in Python, there is a specific type of file that you create. Now you can see now this is a Python code, a Python program that I'm trying to create. We have the end in the pi. So that tells our computer that this program is a Python program. It's written in Python language. So like for C language now we have whatever, let's say the name of your file.c, and all these extensions actually matter when you're writing your code. So let's create a basic Python program to just see a few things that we can do with programming. Now, the simplest thing you can do in any programming language is to print out text into your command line interface. So let's say print. Okay. Hello world. So now this here is my terminal, like my command line interface. So this is used by developers to just assess their computer on a basic level. So it's like this is just like me using my computer, but with a set of commands since I'm a developer, right? So let's take a deep dive into this. Now to run your Python code, you need to have installed a Python interpreter. Now there are two types of programming languages. There are some programming languages that are interpreted. So now those languages, when you run them, they are changed into like binary code. So what I explained that computers don't understand human language earlier. What I didn't let you know is computers actually don't understand programming languages, really. So before your computer can understand your code in any language that you write, it needs to be converted into binary code, zeros and ones. So that's the language that computers really understand, like binary, 0 1 0 1, all those things like that. So that's what they really understand. Now we wrote programming languages were invented to like bridge the gap between human languages and computer languages. So computer has only one language, binary, right? So what we did is like develop an interface to interfere between the user, which is the developer, and then the computer itself, which deals in binary. So now the programming languages, there are two types. One of the types is the one that changes to binary when you run the program. And when I run my Python program, then it changes to binary and executes the commands line by line, which is the instructions that I wrote in the program. But now languages like C are compiled languages, which means before I get to run the program on my computer, I need to have changed it from the language that it is, which is C language, to binary format. That's called compilation. So now I need to have changed it from the language, let's say C or Java, whatever it is. I need to have compiled it into binary before I can then run it on my computer. Otherwise, while things like Python are interpreted, so I cannot run it directly. It is changed to binary on every single instance that I'm running. So let's take a look at Python. Now, when I run my Python code, I must have installed the interpreter, which is Python interpreter. You can get that on the Python website for any operating system you're using. So let me run Python 3 and then basic.py. So now you can see what I have here is the same text I have in this place, hello world. So I've just told my computer to just tell me whenever I run this program, I want it to print or to display hello world. Actually, there's a little type error in my ear. Now, what if I want to do this a few times? Let's say I want to let's say you're trying to apologize to someone, and then in some funny scenarios, person says you should apologize 100 times, right? It would be just quite funny if we could just say print I'm sorry. And then print I'm sorry again. So let me just go ahead and copy this a few times and then, yep. So this works fine. When I run my code, we see I'm sorry a few times. But now this is, I would say, redundant because we are wasting the space in the program. For there are things called loops. Since we are dealing with computers, like computers are, let's say, intelligent to a level, so we can just tell it, I want to do this, I want to print, I want to display I'm sorry. I want to display it a few times. So instead of just trying to like print it multiple times or just provide multiple print lines, I could simply say I want a loop. So a loop is like a way to repeat or to perform actions repeatedly in programming. So let's say for I in range 10 prints Python is cool. So now what I want to do here is I want to print this text. I want to display this text. Python is cool 10 times in my, like whenever I run a program, I want this text to display 10 times. So what I did here is say for I in range 10, which means I want to repeat this 10 times. So let's see what happens when I run my program now. We see Python is cool 10 times, even though I only provided it once in my code. So these are ways you like improvise and do things more efficiently in programming. So there are a bunch of paradigms, there are loops, there are different types of loops. There is the for loop, which is this one I'm using here. There is the while loop, there is the do while loop, there's a bunch of it. So let's take a look at some other paradigms like conditions. So let's say before we take a look at conditions, let's take a look at variables, for example. So variables is like a bunch of containers to store data. We have different types of variables because we have different types of data. So let's say we are trying to store water, for example. We have a specific container to store water. We have different containers to store things that are more solid, like let's say like sugar or like books or like just things, different types of things require different types of containers to store them. The same way we store different types of data in different types of variables. So now let's say we have the ints, variable. The int variable is to store numbers, integer to store numbers. We have the float to store floating point numbers, which are decimal numbers. We have the string to store text. We have boolean to store, like a boolean value is basically does true or false. That's the only two possibilities. It's either it's true or it's false. So that's a boolean value, like yes or no, things like that. So we have a bunch of other variable types, but for now let's just take this few. So now you can see some things are popping up in my code, in my program. You can see a few underlines here and there. This is because I have an error in my code. I cannot run my code like this. It's causing errors. So there are some things, they are like there are syntax errors, and there are different types of errors in programming, really, depending on what language you are using. But now what is common in every language is just like syntax errors, where you're trying to do something in a language that is not valid. Now you can see I'm trying to like display explain integers and then floating point values and strings, but now this is wrong because these things are not really, it's not a correct line of code. So now my code editor is telling me there's a problem with what I'm trying to do here and everything like that. That's why it's like underlining those lines. So now what you could do in programming is when you're trying to explain stuff or comments in your code, we have like different ways to comment in different languages. So for example, I could do this. Now this, you see the underlines are gone and now the color has changed. So this is not code really. This is just a comment in my code. Now the main reason for commenting in code is to explain what you are doing inside of a program to another developer. So let's say we are like a bunch of a team working on a project, for example. When everyone is writing their code, it sometimes gets very hard for other people to understand it. So we use comments to explain and keep track of what is going on where inside of our code. So now this is a comment to be ignored by my compiler or interpreter, depending on your language, to be ignored. So this is basically removed from my code when I'm trying to run it because it's not code. It's just a comment for the developer. It doesn't deal with the computer at all. So we've taken a look at Python. Let's take a look at a few more things that Python can do. Let's take a list, for example, names. So now let me print. So now we're able to store a list of values, like a list of names in a computer program. So this is used, let's say you are trying to develop an application and then store a list, a to-do list, for example. You can use things like this to store a to-do list. So this is a very basic format, really. But this is like the basis of many applications out there that you are seeing. You can begin to understand how they work, how they store data, how they do things. So I mean, let's take a look at some other cool things that Python can do. Let's say we have my name Here we're trying to create a variable, right? My name equals Papaolua. So now let's say when you have like a missed call or something on your phone, and then your phone displays it in a format where you have like you missed the call from this person. So it's basically, it doesn't really like generate an entire text for each person that you miss a call from. What it does is format the text. So let's take a look at something like this. Print. I could just print my name and this works fine. Let me print this. Now you can see my name comes at the bottom of the outputs. But what if I want to print my name and a bunch of text? As you saw earlier, I can print just a bunch of text in my um terminal. Let's say OPE. Oh. Now I have my name is printed, but fine, I'm not using the variable that I created. So what if I want to print a text, like, and I want to print a variable simultaneously? So what I could do is my name is. So now you see we have my name is, and then my name comes right after it. So if I change what is here, let's say Jeremiah, now we have my name is Jeremiah. So this is dynamic in a sense that it takes in values from variables and inserts them into the text. So you can see things like, let's say you have a missed call from, or you missed. I can see this works like notifications on your phone where you missed a call from like a bunch of your friends or things like that. So this is the basis of everything in programming. Like when you write code, write a set of commands for a computer to follow to perform actions. So now let's take a look at, this is basically backend programming, things that you don't see. When you're working on, when you're using an application, for example, you don't see all these things. So that's why it's the backend. But this is very basic. Um, let's say things like WhatsApp or Facebook are very much more complex than this, like almost 1,000 times more complex. So it handles like a lot of lines of code and everything like that. So let's take a look at basic front end also. Now in front-end programming, we'll take a look at CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. So now HTML, hypertext markup language, is like the structure of every website you see. When you are seeing things like text in your website, it's usually HTML. There are a number of other languages like React or TypeScript or like there's a plethora of languages for front end. But let's take a look at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for this time. So HTML is like the structure of the web page. Like when you build a house, for example, we have like the foundations, the pillars, and everything. So that's the HTML. But then the CSS is the design, cascading style sheet. CSS adds the colors, the transitions, the things that look cool in the website, really, the colors, the pictures, and everything. It's like makes everything look better. But then we have the JavaScript. It's what makes the web page dynamic. What makes it possible that when you click a button, it actually reacts and responds to you clicking the button. So let's take a look at the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Let's create an HTML file. So now in every HTML, there's a specific structure to everything. So let me take a look at this HTML5. Now every HTML page you see or every website you see contains this stuff. This is just basically how an HTML file or code is structured. We have the language, we have the head. So these things here are called tags. Our HTML is it's built on tags. We have a lot of tags. We have the header, the body, the meta tags. We have the title. We have images. We have links, and it's plenty really. So we're just taking a few of them here and just to understand how programming itself works. So let's take a look at a few cool things we can do with HTML. So let's say h1 hello world. Now let me open this HTML file in my browser so you can see what it looks like. So let me go ahead into my file explorer and look for this file really. So we have the index.html and programming folder. So let me look for the file. Okay. So now this is the HTML file that I opened earlier. Like this is the HTML file that we wrote in our code right here. Where is it? So now here we have the index.html, right? And this same file, this same HTML is opened right here in our browser. So we have the hello world that is being displayed. But it looks like we wrote a bunch of lines of code here, but we can only see one line, hello world. Why is that? So these tags are just like things that initialize or this is the structure of the web page. It's not everything that shows in your front end. So this doc type HTML is just telling like this is the specific type of HTML that we are using in this code, in this HTML code. We have the language that does tell. So now you notice sometimes when you visit web pages and it's in a foreign language, like it's in French, but then your browser tells you, like gives you a pop-up and tells you, okay, do you want to translate this website into English? How does the browser know that this website is not in English in itself? It's because of things like this. When you tell the when you put things like French instead of this, and then when you visit the web page, the browser automatically discovers that okay, the language in this website is in French. So then it can tell you, okay, do you want to translate this website into English, since English is your own default language. So you can then begin to see how these logics work. So let's take a look at the head. So now this head is basically contains like tags that are important, basically very important tags in your page, like this UCF8, which is the format for your or for your HTML file. We have the viewports. You can forget about this for now. We'll be dealing with this later. But now let's take a look at the title document. This is, it looks like it's not showing you a web page, but it actually is. Now when you visit the web page and you're seeing things like this, these documents, that's the title of the website. Now you can see when I change this, let's say my page. When I reload this now, we have my page. So that's the title of the web page. Now let's take a look at some other cool things we can do. So now the H1 tag is just like headers. H is for header, right? But then we have different levels of headers. Like H1 is the biggest header you could have in HTML. H2 is much smaller. So let's say H2. So now when I reload my page, you see we have, it's still a big text, but it's smaller than H1. So we have all the way to H5, I think. We have, no. When I reload my page again, we have even smaller text. All right, so let's take a look at some other tags in HTML. Some text. Now this is just like the smallest or just like medium-sized text, like basic text that you could use when you're writing blogs or things like that. So let's take a look at links. Now a link or a link tag in HTML is the A tag, right? So it contains like two things, really. Now these things that are present inside of the tags are called like they're like arguments, let's say it arguments or parameters, really. So it contains like the link that you really want this page to go. You know, sometimes let me just reload the page and explain. Now you can see we have this Google. It's a text, but it's like it's colored, it's blue or purple in color, and then it's underlined. So this tells you that this text is actually a link. But now we are not seeing this link there because it's basically like hidden or embedded inside of it. So now when you click this text, what you get to is the link that is inside of it, like google.com. But now you can see here we have just the google.com inside of the HTML tag, then the text that is going to be displayed right here. So you can basically display anything here, like let's say Facebook, no. Now when I load my page, it says Facebook, but it still goes to Google when I load it. So now you can see a bunch of malicious actions that you could do as a developer. Actually, I'm not saying you should do this, but now you can begin to see how some websites tend to display things like links for other websites, for example, but you're clicking the link and it's going somewhere else. So this is the way it works. They can tell you that, okay, this link is supposed to go to Opera or an Opera browser or a different page, but then you click it and it goes somewhere else. That's because in the backend, in the HTML file, they are posting a different link, but instead of what's actually supposed to represent. So now let's take a look at a few CSS designs that we could do. Let me remove all of this. Let me say h1 my page. Let's say my first paragraph and then my second paragraph. So let's take a look at this in so now we have something like this. But now let's use CSS to make this look better. Now you could write external CSS files for this, but for now let's just keep everything like in a single file. I would explain that later. So let's say we have in the head. Now this style tag is like where you have your designs inside of the HTML. So now let's take a look at background color equals light blue, h1 white. Now with all of this, let's take a look at what happens when I reload my page. Now you can see something looks different, even though I just added a few lines. So what happened here is the this line, this block of code, it looks into my HTML file and then looks for this text. Look for the body tag. Now you can see the body tag is right here, the body tag, and then the close body tag. So what it does is it sets background color to light blue. Now you can see the entire background color of my page is blue, light blue. And then let's take a look at the H1. H1 looks for the H1 tag. Now you can see when I hover over this, you can see it's showing the H1 tag right on top of the cursor right here, because this is going to match the H1 tag. Now you can see I said in the H1 tag, I want to change the color to white, which means it's going to change the color of my text, my page to white. And now you can see text align center. That's why you can see that if I remove this now, the text falls back to the left. You can see it falls back to the left, but I can choose where the text goes by saying text align center, and you can see it goes to the center of the page. So now let's see, we have the font family. We change the fonts for the paragraphs and then the font size. Now let me change this to something so you can see how cool it actually is. I can see the text become bigger because I changed the size of the text. I can say 10 and it goes all the way smaller. So that's how it is. Let me say 30 and now we have, yeah. So now let's make it look quite nicer. So let's say we have background color for the p tags. Let's say light gray. Let's say so let's take a look at what I've done. I will come back and explain this in a bit, but let's take a look at what it looks like now. Now you can see we have things like this. Well, let's make it look a little bit better, and let's say we have height should be now we have something like this. So you can see what I did here was I changed the background color for the specific p tags, which is the paragraph tags. Then I set the height, so you can see things like yeah, it's now showing much higher, which is the height from this top to the bottom. Now you can see the width, also the distance from left to right. Now this is just like the how do I say, like the centimeters for CSS. We have px and a bunch of others, but we're using those px for now. So let's say we have the text align center is what makes this text fall into the center of this box. The text align center makes it fall into the center of whatever it is. So now text align center, we have the margin equals 50. So that's like the distance from the left and right. So you can see it's like a little bit distant from the left side of the screen. But when I remove this, it goes back. So you can see it falls back to the left of the screen. So the margin like tells it how much distance it should give itself from the left or the right side of the screen or whatever is actually surrounding it. So let's go back and change that margin 50. And then the border radius is just like, before I just go into that, let me explain what the border is. And the border of an object or of a tag in HTML is just like the corners, the lines that surround the tag. Now you can see the border is like just a bunch of lines around it. But now the border radius is the edge. I can decide to change what the edge looks like. So now when I say border radius equals 25 px, I'm saying that I want a curved edge. Like I want it to look something that is like round. So that's why it's like this. So these are those like cool things. I'll just take the basic stuff all over this to be explained further in the next sessions. But just for now, understand like these are the ways websites are developed. So let's add some buttons to our page and see some cool things we can do. Let me remove all of this. So here I just added 3 buttons that will do basically nothing. But let's see what it looks like. And let me reload my page. We have 3 buttons, click me, click me, click me. Right, but it's doing nothing for now because the buttons are just there in HTML. But now let's make the buttons look a little bit better before we just go ahead and try to do something about it. Let's say button background color equals green, color equals white. So you can begin to guess what the button will look like from all these lines of code. We have background color equals green. So now the background of the button should look something like green. Then we should have the color, which is the color of the text inside of like the click me should the color of this click me inside of the button should be white. The padding should be 1020. So the padding is like the distance of text from inside from the corners of all the from the borders really. So let's take a look at the cursor pointer. This cursor pointer is like when I let's say things like this. When I'm in the left side of my screen, you can see my cursor is showing like an arrow stuff. But when I go into my text, it changes to something like a text editor. So now what this is saying is that whenever I go over my button, it should change this to it should change the cursor to a pointer like an ant that is going over the buttons. So let's take a look at the margin. So when I reload my page, we have something that looks like this. It's quite fun. Now let me change the margin, the border radius, so it looks like it has round edges. So now I can say border radius, let's say 15 px. So now it will look rounded but not too rounded. So now you can see it looks something like this. So now it looks much better than before, right? So now let's make it do something when we click it. So let's change all of this. Let's say we have red. Let's say we have blue. Now let's say green. But now since we have different colors for different buttons, we should be able to change each of the buttons, right? So let's just do something about that. Let's remove the background color from here. Now we can use the inline edit, inline CSS to like decide what color is for which buttons in the same line as the HTML. So now you can say style equals background color. Then we can say red. Yeah. So for this one, let's say, let's just copy the text and just change the color inside. Let's say copy this. We can come here and say the background color should be blue. And here I want green. Now let's see what this also looks like. Let me reload my page. Now we have red, blue, and green. So let's do something that is quite cool here. Let's see whenever we click the red button, we want the page to change to red. Whenever we click the blue button, it should change to blue, and whenever we click the green button, it should change the page to green. So let's see how we can do that. Now let's say we have Now this ID is just like a way to recognize each and every one of the HTML tags. So like each and every one of them have their own ID. So you can choose what happens to an HTML tag using the ID. You can select an HTML tag using the ID in JavaScript. So it's just like quite nice to use the IDs. So let's say the ID equals blue, ID equals green. So this doesn't affect what it looks like in the HTML, right? It's still the same thing, but this is just for JavaScript purposes. So now let's go ahead and create our JavaScript to make the page change color whenever we click the buttons. So now let's say script. So now what we did here is just first, before we go ahead and explain, let's just take a look at if it works. Let me reload my page. Now we have still not working. So let's take a look at that. Click function. So here I'm just trying to like make the logic for the page to change colors when you click the buttons. Just give me a few minutes. Let me say blue here. Now this is so now we have it working fine. So when I click the red button, the page goes to red. When I click the blue button, it goes to blue. When I click the green button, it goes to green. So that works fine. But now let's understand what's really happening right here. Now we have the page. When the page loads, like it loads in the normal color, which is light blue. When we click red, it goes to red, blue goes to blue, and then green goes to green. So this, it's quite simple, but it's also, now let's take a look at what happens really here. Now this on click is like, I'm telling this HTML tag that whenever you are clicked, you need to run a command. You need to run this function. Now here in our JavaScript, we wrote a function, a simple function really. So a function is like just a collection of or instructions to run inside of your code that is like divided into segments. So we have a function that does a specific task. So what this does is just change the colors of the HTML page really. So what this does is now we have the HTML button. So now we have the on click. So what this does is it changes the document, the body, the style, the background color. What it does is it takes in as input, right, an HTML color to use, like a color to use for the HTML page. Now what it does is it changes the color to whatever color is provided. Now instead of this on click, we said whenever you are clicked, we need to call the change color button and send in red. So whenever I click, you should like call the function that is change color and provide the red as input. So it changes the color to red. This one changes the color to blue and then green. So that's how this entire thing works. Now we have red, blue, green for each button. So we'll be explaining all of these paradigms in full detail in the next session. But just for now, you see how these things actually begin and how they work basically. So now we have all of these HTML, CSS, and JavaScript working together in the same file. We could separate them, but we'll do that in the next session. So we could separate them into different files of their own to make things more structured. Now let's take a look at a few mistakes that developers do when they're writing code. Now, when you're writing code in your, let's say we write code in, let's say Python, for example, people make mistakes of like trying to solve problems all by themselves. Now, there are things that in Python that are called like modules or packages. Someone somewhere has solved the problem before. So usually when you're trying to solve the same problem, like getting the square of a value, for example, let's take a look at that. Let's say I want to take an input from a user. Let's say my value. Now this is a simple program like in Python to ask the user for inputs and then print the input out to a terminal. So let's see what happens here. I'll enter a number. Let's see, I enter 849. Now you can see it's telling me I entered 849 as a number. But now let's say we're trying to guess the square of this number. So let me say square equals. Now let me print this out. Print. So now let me provide 89. Now we have the square of 89 is 7921. So this is fun. But now let's say if we want square roots, right? So let's say the square roots now you can see this is quite cryptic. We're trying to get the square root of a value. So let me change this to square root. So this is just like the like a simple way to try to get the square root. So let me say 89. Now we have 9.433, but it's not accurate really, but it's quite close to what we want. But now instead of trying to do this ourselves, there are things called Python packages. So someone somewhere has written a code to get the square root of numbers really. So we don't have to try to do it ourselves. So you don't need to implement every single thing from the scratch. You just need to like do research and see if someone somewhere has solved that same problem before you. So you can just go ahead and use the Python package. So now let's say import math. Now let's say square root equals math dot square root, and let's see what happens here. Now when I provide the same inputs 89, we have 9.42. So without trying to like do the maths ourselves, we don't get like without trying to do the math ourselves, we still get the same response. So you don't have to like write the logic yourself all the time. There are Python packages that have solved problems all over the internet. So what you just need to do is find them and then discover which one works best for you. Now also you need to read documentation. Now before you try to use like Python packages or functions or modules that you're trying to use in your code, make sure you read the documentation. It helps you a lot in trying to use the packages or the modules inside of your code, because that helps you write in best practices and everything like that. Now, some developers tend to make the errors of trying to like write code without testing it. So you see, when you're writing code, you really need to test in like a large scale development environment. Writing a bunch like 1,000 lines of code, you need to test it regularly to see if you have not broken or made some errors inside of your code. So you need to comment your code also to make sure that it's readable to other developers and things like that. Yeah. So now we've taken a look at the basic systems of backend and front-end programming. So thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, everyone.